for being there. When I was growing up, I always had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Whenever there was a book, I tore it open. At first, it began grudgingly. My mom made me read 30 minutes a day, and I'd hit books like the illustrated classics. And soon I was tearing into National Geographics faster than they could send them out. I'd go back and reread old ones. I had a thirst for knowledge, and books were that medium for me. And more importantly, history books. They came to me, and I read them faster than you think someone in the 5th grade could. And my love of history really began in the 3rd grade when I did my first research project on ancient Egypt. And for me, this was a struggle. I learned to do citations. And as a 3rd grader, that is absolutely awful, the worst thing in the world. When I learned about ancient Egypt, I felt like I was discovering it for the first time by myself. When I learned about the pyramids, it was almost as if I was there, paling in comparison to their enormity and just the size of them. When I learned about King Tutankhamun's tomb, I felt like I was there in the sand next to the archaeologist, sifting through the sand and discovering it for the first time. For me, this was an exotic world that I had never known before, beyond the borders of my 3rd grade room. And to me, it opened up my eyes to history and the things that we could learn from history, the worlds that I didn't know about that I needed to learn immediately, as fast as possible. And as I grew and matured, my understanding of history grew and matured as well. It was no longer dull times, dates, places, battles that you learned about for a semester and then you forget. For me, it began to take on a new meaning. The magnitude of certain events and certain people and how their effects rippled throughout history. For me, though, I picked up on the human element of history. Humans throughout history are not too much different than we are today. Social norms may change. People's ways of thought may liberalize slowly over time. But at the very essence, all humans are, for the most part, exactly the same. Someone in the 1800s is not too much different than we are today. And so, as a result, you can learn from the successes and the failures, the triumphs and the downfalls of the people of history. You can really take their life, analyze it, see what they did great, why they did it, and what that effect on history is. So for me, people of history have always been my focus, my strong point, the stuff that I wanted to learn about. And above all, Teddy Roosevelt stuck out most to me. He's always spoken to me. You see, Teddy Roosevelt was a 2-term president of the United States, and by far one of the greatest Americans to ever live. He was a man's man. He's not like the politicians you see today that flip-flop and say things so they can earn support, but don't really mean it. When he stood for something, he stood for something right. There's a couple things that we could learn from Teddy Roosevelt, and there's not nearly enough time in a speech to talk about them all, to go through his speeches, his battles, his events. So I just want to hit on the main things that I thought were important that we could really learn from Teddy Roosevelt. And the thing that strikes me most is his upbringing. When Teddy Roosevelt was born, he was a sick, frail child, and his father wanted a rugged son that he could box with and, do the things that fathers like to do with their son, but he was always sick. And so he said to him, "You've got a sharp mind, but your body is frail and weak, and I give you the tools to build your body, but you have to do it yourself." And without hesitation, he said, "I'll build my body." And from then on, him and his father, they built a home gym. He took up lifting weights, boxing. He began hiking mountains in the free time. Even after he graduated college and his doctor said he should take a desk job so that he could maintain his health, he responded immediately by climbing the tallest mountain that he could find, which to me speaks volumes. He changed himself through hard work, through a strenuous life, and he carried that throughout his presidency. He was always striving to do better, to be better. He wrote 35 books by the end of his lifetime, but he had read thousands, and that was his primary means of learning and bettering himself. And that's just a few things that he did in his personal time. When he went to Africa, he killed over 11,000 animals, had them all stuffed, mounted, caged, and brought back to America, and donated them to the Smithsonian. But there was too many for the Smithsonian to have, so they went to smaller museums around the area. That's an impressive human being. And he brought this to his way of life. He held many jobs. He was a police commissioner. He's a governor, 2-term president. He was Assistant Secretary of the Navy before he left that post voluntarily. And that in itself was an interesting story. You see, many people know about the Rough Riders and the Battle of San Juan Hill. You see, Teddy Roosevelt always wanted to be a war hero. Growing up, he read great books of history about great men who fought their own battles, and he wanted that battle. He wanted to have his own war. And so when the Spanish-American War came about, he wasted no time, resigned his post as Assistant Secretary to the Navy, a pretty substantial post in the government, and he would have led him to great things, but he decided that he wanted to join the Army. And they said, okay, you can be a colonel, here's your unit. And he turned that down too. He said, no, I'm not good enough to be a colonel. I don't have the military experience. I'll take lieutenant colonel. And he hand chose all his men for this unit. 2,300 men applied, or 23,000 as I was, and only 500 were handpicked by Teddy Roosevelt. He picked the best of the best from the frontiers, the hard places, so that when they went into battle, he knew he could rely on them. And above all else, he led these men because he was one of them. You see, he had worked on the frontiers of Dakotas, and he was much like them. He's owned a farm. He worked on one. He was a tough man. To lead those tough men, he led by example. And that's what politicians today lack. They need to take a leaf from Teddy Roosevelt's book, become a man's man, and learn to lead from the front. You see, Teddy Roosevelt died at the age of 60, which seems pretty young, and he was struck with malaria. But having accomplished so much, he died in his sleep peacefully. And it's often been said that death had to take Teddy Roosevelt in his sleep, because if he had been awake, there surely would have been a fight. And that is the life of Teddy Roosevelt.